Daniel Carter had built his empire in silence. At 28, he was the co-founder of a rapidly expanding tech company, a name whispered in Silicon Valley's elite circles but rarely recognized outside of them. That was how he liked it. Wealth had changed everything around him. His friends, his relationships, even the way strangers looked at him. But he refused to let it change him. He had watched men in his position fall into traps of illusion, deceived by the flattery of those drawn not to them but to their bank accounts. He had seen them mistaken admiration for love, only to be left empty when fortunes faltered. So Daniel had made a choice. He would hide his wealth when it came to dating. No lavish cars, no designer suits, no extravagant dinners. He would live, for a time, as an ordinary man, just a struggling graduate student at a state university with a small apartment and a tight budget. He wanted to see who would care for him without the shimmer of wealth distorting the truth. That was how he met Olivia Hayes. It was an ordinary coffee shop near campus, the kind of place where students crammed for exams and freelancers lingered over their laptops. Olivia had been sitting by the window, flipping through a notebook filled with handwritten notes. She looked different from the others, focused but distant, as if her mind were somewhere else entirely. Daniel noticed how she barely reacted when the barista called her order twice, as if lost in thought. When she finally moved, it was with a kind of grace that didn't seem deliberate, just effortless. She wasn't the first woman Daniel had tested this way. In the past, some had lost interest quickly when they realized he wasn't throwing around money. Others had pretended not to care but subtly hinted at expectations. Weekend getaways, expensive gifts, hints about their dream engagement rings. Olivia, though, was a mystery. She seemed neither impressed nor disappointed. At first, it was simple. Coffee shop conversations turned into study sessions, which turned into long walks across campus. He played his part well, the broke but ambitious student, always mindful of his budget, living off instant ramen and second-hand textbooks. She didn't pry. She never asked why he didn't splurge on little luxuries, or why he hesitated before agreeing to a dinner out. If anything, she seemed to understand. Daniel had anticipated many reactions, but Olivia's indifference toward money intrigued him. It wasn't that she pretended it didn't matter. It was as if it truly didn't exist in her world. He started paying attention to the details. She never talked about extravagant things, never showed interest in expensive brands, and never even mentioned family wealth, though she carried herself with quiet confidence. Her clothes were simple but well-fitted. Her accessories, modest. It made no sense. Most people who didn't care about money had either never had it, or had too much of it to think about. Then, odd things started happening. One night, when Daniel walked Olivia home, she hesitated before letting him see where she lived. She claimed she had roommates and that the place was a mess. He didn't press, but later, when he checked the street out of curiosity, he noticed something strange. The building she entered wasn't student housing. It was a luxury condo complex with a private entrance. That made no sense for someone who shared rent with roommates. Another time, she received a phone call while they were together. Her whole demeanor changed. She turned away, her voice soft but firm, and after she hung up, she casually brushed it off. It wasn't a boyfriend, Daniel was certain of that, but it was something. She had secrets too. It became a game, a quiet puzzle between them. Daniel concealed his true life, and Olivia concealed something of her own. The problem was, he didn't know which of them was better at it. One afternoon, after weeks of seeing each other, Daniel decided to push his experiment further. He mentioned an unpaid internship opportunity he was considering, something he framed as a dream but financially impractical. He wanted to see if Olivia would react, if she would offer support, advice, or even money. But instead of discouraging him, she encouraged him in a way that felt entirely genuine. "You'll figure it out," she had said with a quiet certainty, her eyes steady on his. And that was it. No questions about how he'd afford it, no concerns about stability. It was as if she believed, without hesitation, that he would be fine. That night, Daniel sat in his actual penthouse, overlooking the city skyline, and wondered who Olivia really was. He had started this game to test someone else, but now he was the one questioning everything. Daniel was no stranger to deception. In business, he had seen people disguise their intentions behind polished smiles, partners who claimed loyalty only to turn when the money was right. He had learned to read between the lines, to notice the small inconsistencies that others ignored. That skill had helped him build his empire. But with Olivia, he wasn't sure if he was discovering something hidden or simply imagining shadows where there were none. He had started with the simplest test, watching her. He paid attention to the way she carried herself, to the small details most people overlooked. She was confident but reserved. She spoke carefully, never offering too much about herself. When she talked about her past, there were no concrete details, just vague references, places she had lived, schools she had attended, but never anything specific enough to track. And yet, despite all the unanswered questions, she wasn't cold or distant. She was thoughtful in ways that felt real. When he casually mentioned that his old sneakers had finally worn out, she surprised him by showing up the next day with a second-hand pair she had found at a thrift shop. It was an act of kindness, not wealth, and it unsettled him more than if she had simply bought him new ones. It wasn't about money to her, or at least, it didn't seem to be. But then there were the contradictions. The luxury apartment building still nagged at him. He had never seen her car, but she never seemed to need one. Sometimes she'd show up after disappearing for a day, with no explanation of where she had been. She never mentioned work, never complained about money, yet she never seemed short on it either. When they went out, she let him pay, but she never hesitated when it was her turn. She never flinched at splitting the cost of things, yet she never showed signs of needing to budget. Then there was the way she reacted to certain things. News stories about wealth and corruption, discussions about business and power. Most people either admired the rich or resented them, but Olivia seemed detached, as if she understood both sides too well to take one. He told himself he would let it go. After all, he was hiding something too. But Daniel wasn't the type to leave questions unanswered. So he did what he did best. He investigated. It started with small things, searching for her social media, looking for any online presence that might tell him more. But there was almost nothing. No old posts, no traces of a past life, just a few generic accounts with minimal activity. It was as if she had erased herself from the internet. That was unusual. People like Olivia didn't just exist without a history. Then came the night that changed everything. They had planned to meet at a small bookstore cafe, one of Olivia's favorite spots. But she was late, something she almost never was. Daniel waited, checking his phone, wondering if she had forgotten. He was about to leave when he saw her outside through the window. She wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit stood beside her. Older, polished, and clearly wealthy. Not the kind of man who wandered into student cafes. Daniel watched as Olivia spoke to him, her posture tense. The man said something, and Olivia shook her head, her arms crossing defensively. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't casual. Then, suddenly, she turned her head, her eyes locking on Daniel through the cafe window. For the first time since he had met her, Olivia looked caught. She murmured something to the man, then stepped away, entering the cafe with a forced smile. Daniel acted as if he hadn't seen anything, but he knew. Something was wrong. That night, as Olivia left, Daniel followed her at a distance. He didn't know what he expected to find. Maybe just confirmation that she lived in that luxury building, that she was someone with money but didn't flaunt it. Maybe that was her secret. But when she reached the building, she didn't go inside. Instead, she turned down an alley, moving quickly, as if trying to avoid being seen. Daniel hesitated, then followed. At the other end of the alley, a black car was waiting. A driver stepped out, opening the door for Olivia without a word. She slid in without hesitation, and before Daniel could get any closer, the car pulled away. Daniel stood there, watching the taillights disappear. She wasn't who she claimed to be, and now he had to find out why. Daniel wasn't a man who ignored red flags. In business, overlooking warning signs led to failure, and in life, it led to betrayal. Olivia's secret was no longer just an odd inconsistency. It was something deliberate. She was hiding something, just as he was, but the difference was that he had constructed his lie for a purpose. He had no idea what hers was. The black car haunted him. It wasn't just a ride service or a friend picking her up. It was something else, too professional, too precise. The man in the suit, the way she had reacted when she saw Daniel watching. It all pointed to something bigger. He needed answers. He started with the building. The luxury condo complex wasn't student housing, and it wasn't the kind of place someone on a modest budget could afford. Daniel had resources, even in his poor student disguise. It didn't take much effort to find out that the building had strict security, private elevators, and tenants who paid in full. No co-signers, no roommates. Either Olivia lived there under someone else's name, or she had access to money she never mentioned. That alone was strange, but it wasn't enough. He needed more. The next step was a simple background check, the kind that could be run on anyone with the right access. What he expected was straightforward. Some trace of her past, a record of where she had lived, maybe even her family's financial status. But what he found was stranger. Olivia Hayes was nearly invisible. No credit history beyond basic transactions. No family listed anywhere. No employment records. It was as if she had appeared out of nowhere a few years ago. That wasn't just unusual. That was impossible. Even people who valued their privacy had digital footprints. Everyone left traces, whether they wanted to or not. But Olivia didn't. The only way to erase a history that completely was with power, money, or government intervention. Daniel sat back, staring at his screen. This wasn't a coincidence. This was deliberate. If Olivia had gone through this much effort to hide who she was, then there was something worth hiding. That night, as he lay awake in his small apartment, the one he kept just for his undercover life, he thought about the risks. He had started this game as a test, a way to ensure that whoever he let into his life cared about him, not his money. But now, he wasn't sure if he was the one testing Olivia, or if she had been testing him all along. Still, he needed to know. So he did what he did best. He investigated. One of his security contacts owed him a favor, a man who specialized in discreet tracking. Daniel gave him the details, the black car, the luxury condo, Olivia's odd history. Within a day, the report came back. The car was registered to a shell company, a name that meant nothing on the surface. But following the paper trail led to an address, an office in downtown Manhattan belonging to a high-end private security firm. Private security meant one of two things. Either Olivia was under protection or someone was watching her. Either way, this wasn't just about money. This was about power. Daniel sat in silence for a long time, processing. He had spent years around powerful men, investors, CEOs, politicians. He had learned to recognize the signs of wealth that went beyond money. This wasn't just a woman from a rich family avoiding attention. This was something deeper. Either she was connected to someone important, or she was running from something dangerous. And yet, she never acted like someone who was afraid. That was the part that didn't make sense. His chance to get closer came sooner than expected. A few nights later, Olivia invited him to an art gallery event. Nothing extravagant, just a small showing at an independent space. It felt too normal, too casual, given what he had uncovered. But Daniel accepted, knowing that being close to her was the only way to get the truth. When he arrived, Olivia was already there, dressed simply but elegantly, blending in without standing out. But what caught Daniel's attention wasn't her. It was the man watching her. Across the room, near the entrance, stood someone he recognized, not personally, but by type. Military posture, scanning the crowd, not engaging with anyone. A bodyguard, though he wasn't acting as one openly. Daniel had seen men like this before. Hired security, the kind that moved in silence but never lost sight of their target. So Olivia was being watched. He decided to test something. He led her through the gallery, guiding her toward a quieter area near the back, away from the larger crowd. Almost immediately, the man adjusted his position, subtly shifting to keep her in sight. This wasn't a coincidence. She wasn't just a woman with money. She was someone valuable, someone protected. Daniel played his part, acting normal, but his mind was running through the possibilities. Witness protection? A crime family? Political connections? Whatever it was big enough to keep her shielded, yet small enough that she could still pretend to be normal. As the night ended, he expected Olivia to leave first, maybe in another black car, maybe disappearing into the city the way she had before. But instead, she surprised him. She walked with him. No car, no security, just the two of them in the night air. For the first time, Daniel wasn't sure if she was letting him see this side of her, or if she simply believed he hadn't noticed. Either way, the game was shifting. She wasn't the only one playing anymore. That night, he made his decision. He wasn't going to pull away. He wasn't going to back off. If Olivia had secrets, he was going to uncover them. And he had a feeling that whatever he found would change everything. Daniel had always believed he was in control. In business, in life, even in relationships, he set the rules, determined the pace, and made the calculations that kept him a step ahead. But with Olivia, the illusion of control was slipping. His experiment had turned on him. He had begun this as a way to test her, to see if she cared about him for who he was rather than what he owned. But now, she was the mystery. She was the one who left unanswered questions, who made him second-guess what he thought he knew. He had played the role of a struggling student to see her true self, but all along, she had been playing a role too. And he had no idea what hers was. But he was about to find out. The moment came unexpectedly. A week after the gallery event, Olivia invited him to dinner. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet spot. The kind of place that didn't require reservations but still had charm. Daniel accepted, watching her closely, waiting for the moment she would slip, the moment she would reveal something without realizing it. But Olivia was careful. She always was. Still, as they ate, Daniel noticed the way she studied him. For the first time, it felt like she was the one watching him, as if she, too, had been searching for something. And that was when he knew. She had figured it out. Maybe she hadn't uncovered the whole truth. Maybe she didn't know about his company, his wealth, the empire he had built under a different name. But she knew something wasn't right. She knew he wasn't what he claimed to be. And yet, she said nothing. The night passed like any other, but the silence between them had changed. It was no longer the comfortable quiet of two people getting to know each other. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions. Daniel decided to break it first. The next morning, he made a call. Not to his investigators, not to his business contacts, but to a friend in real estate. He had them look up the ownership records for Olivia's building. He expected to find something hidden, a trust, a corporation, maybe even a fake name. Instead, what he found was simple. The apartment was in her name, paid in full. No loans, no co-signers. She had money, real money, and she had never once let it show. Daniel sat with that information for a long time. He had assumed she was connected to wealth, maybe through family, maybe through something more complex. But this was different. She wasn't just hiding her past. She was doing exactly what he was doing, living a different life. The realization hit him harder than he expected. All this time, he had been testing Olivia, waiting to see if she would judge him for being poor, if she would be disappointed when she realized he couldn't provide luxury, expensive dates, a future wrapped in privilege. But she had never cared, because she had been hiding the same thing. The next time they met, Daniel paid attention to the details he had once overlooked. The way she never complained about money, not because she didn't think about it, but because she didn't have to. The way she navigated the city with quiet confidence, never hesitating, as if she had lived in places where everything was handled for her. The way she never reacted to the small financial struggles he mentioned, not out of indifference, but because she had never experienced them herself. And most of all, the way she never once questioned his story, because she knew what it was like to live a lie. That night, as they walked through the city streets, Daniel made a decision. He had spent weeks trying to uncover her secret, to test her, to figure out who she really was. But now, it no longer mattered. Because for the first time in his life, he had found someone who understood him. Not the version of him that people saw in the news, not the image he carefully controlled, but the part of him that didn't need money to feel valuable. And she had been testing him just as much as he had been testing her. As they stopped at a quiet street corner, Olivia turned to him, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, Daniel considered telling her everything, that he wasn't a broke student, that he had built something bigger than she could imagine, that he had been watching her, just as she had been watching him. But then she smiled, just slightly, as if she already knew. Maybe she did. Maybe she had known all along. And for the first time, Daniel didn't feel the need to prove anything. They had both played the game, and they had both won.